Well, last year before the start of the football season, my Minnesota Vikings were in need of a quarterback. You know, the guy who throws the ball, kind of one of the more important people on the team. And so they went out and signed a guy by the name of Sam Darnold. Now, Sam Darnold was a former first-round draft pick who had two failed starting stints with the New York Jets and Carolina Panthers. Things did not go well for Darnold in these organizations. By all standards of measurement, Darnold was what we would call in sports a bust, right? There was high expectations for him, but he did not live up to those expectations. And so I wasn't too excited when the Vikings signed him. I was kind of like, oh no, what are we thinking, right? In fact, I remember Dennis Haugen, he came up to me as a friendly Packer fan and just kind of mockingly asked me, is Sam Darnold the answer? And I was like, no, right? Absolutely not. He is not the guy we're looking for. But Sam Darnold, of all people, would go on to lead the Vikings to one of the best records in franchise history. And what did Vikings do? We traded him away, right? And so now he's playing for a dominant Seattle Seahawks team that this very night has a legitimate chance to go and play in the Super Bowl. So I doubted him back then, but now as I'm kind of watching from the sidelines, I'm going, man, I really wish we had Sam Darnold back. And I wonder, have you ever doubted someone like that before? Like you saw someone who was maybe in some kind of leadership position that you really didn't think was cut out to be there, right? Maybe for you it was a teacher or a professor in college. Like after the first day of school, you left their class thinking, man, this is going to be a really long year. They came off to you as maybe crabby or unorganized or just plain weird. But as the year went on, the more you grew to like Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, and until by the last day of school, you were really going to miss being a part of their class. Or maybe it was a politician. Like when you first saw her on TV, you really did not like her at all. You thought she was just awful, right? Maybe you disagreed. You thought you disagreed with her on her policies, or you just didn't like her personality. But the more you heard her speak, or better yet, the more you watched her govern, you found yourself agreeing with what she was saying and doing. Or maybe it was your husband. Let's just say he didn't make the best first impression. Like when he came up to you and asked you on that first date, you thought to yourself, yeah, when pigs fly, right? No way. But as time went on, and as he pursued you and as you saw his heart, he slowly but surely won you over. I think of Laura. She had a friend in college, and there was this kind of nerdy kid who was in their class, and man, he was just kind of this strange guy, and one of her friends was this sports girl, and they would joke about him. They would make fun of him a little bit, because he was just kind of a quirky guy. His last name was Knickerbocker, and so they kind of laugh about that a little bit. And so it's really funny that now she gets calls from Kelly Knickerbocker. Right? Just kind of interesting how all that worked out. But sometimes, guys, I think there's just a truth to this, that sometimes people, especially leaders or just people we see, we get this bad first impression, and we wonder, how can they perform? How can they help me? How can they be anything that I'm interested in? But they have a way that over time to win us over. Well, this is now the third week of our series called The Fall of Saul, which is all about the story of Saul, who was the first king of the nation of Israel. So after 400 years of living under a theocratic form of government, the people of Israel finally got tired of trying to do things God's way and opted instead to try what all the other nations were doing, namely to go out and have a king for themselves. And despite a dire warning from the prophet Samuel that having a king was not all that it was cracked up to be, the people demand a monarch nonetheless. Namely, they want Samuel to find someone to be king over them. And last week we introduced who this king would be. We learn about a man named Saul, who based on outward appearance is every inch a king. Like the text goes out of its way to tell us that he's really rich. He is extremely handsome. He is really tall. He's very, very physically impressive. Yet when the time comes for him to be presented as the king of the people, this big guy literally runs and hides. And that's a pattern that we kind of notice about Saul in the opening chapters of his introduction. That he is presented with all of these God-given opportunities, many God-given opportunities, but he, time and time again, seems to hesitate. And though there are a lot of examples of this, the biggest one that comes up happens towards the end of chapter 10, when he fails to attack a garrison of Philistines who are encamped on a place called God's Hill. Now remember, the Philistines are the biggest threat to the nation of Israel, as the Lord actually tells the prophet Samuel that a key part of the king's job will be to save my people from the hand of the Philistines. However, when given the opportunity to provoke said Philistines, Saul chickens out. Again, he fails to initiate. Yet despite this major character flaw, Saul is able to sit in the passenger seat, and he's literally kind of driven by God into this position as king. He is presented before the people, and they hail him as their ruler. However, not everyone is convinced by Saul, because chapter 10 ends with a really interesting detail. Though Saul has a devoted core of followers, there were some worthless fellows who said, "How can this man save us?" Saul had naysayers. Why? Well, I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with the fact that they found the dude hiding like a kid, avoiding bedtime when he was supposed to come up and be their king. And so these people look at Saul and they're like, seriously? This is who God chose? How in the world is he going to save us? Saul is the Sam Darnold of his day. He has a lot of doubters. Doubters who legitimately wonder, how can this man save us? And that's exactly the question that our passage is going to answer for us. So if you have a Bible, I want to invite you to open it up to 1 Samuel chapter 11. If you're using one of the hardback black Bibles in the chairs, 1 Samuel 11 is on page 233. But before we read it, we have to set the stage with some really important historical context. So let's rewind the tape and go back about 150 years in Israel's history. We're back, as many of you know, in the era of the Judges. Right? There's a lot of instability in Israel at this time, and as you read the book of Judges, you will notice that there's like this progression where things go from good to bad to worse. That by the time you get to the very end of the book of Judges, you have recorded for you one of the most disturbing, horrific stories in the entire Bible. To the point that I just kind of have to give you a little bit of a trigger warning with it, because it is terrible. And I know we have little ears in here, so I'm going to try to kind of summarize it in a PG way. But the story goes as follows. So one day in the land of Israel, there was a Levite, a priest, who was traveling through the countryside with his concubine. Now, to put in modern terms, right, concubine means the girl that he's living with but wasn't married to. In reality, she was kind of like a servant who provided favors for him, to be frank. Which is really your first red flag that this is going to be a super messed up story, right? The pastor has his own personal prostitute. It's like, okay, this is strange. It's indicative, really, of the spiritual state of the whole country at this time. It should kind of cue you in that, man, things aren't right here in Israel. Eventually, this Levite and his concubine wander into a town called Gibeah of the tribe of Benjamin. and a kind elderly man invites them to stay the night in his house. However, during the course of the night, a mob of Gibeonite men surround the old man's house. And they demand that he send out this stranger, send out this priest, so that this mob of men can, to reference another Old Testament story, sodomize him. This is how bad things have gotten in Israel. This is the state that they're at. The old man refuses, and instead the Levite, who himself should be out there with the crowd, throws his concubine out the door. And the text tells us that the mob abused her all night until the morning. And so horrific and violent is this abuse that at the break of dawn, this poor woman collapses on the front porch of the house and dies on the spot. It is unspeakably awful. And the Levite, who himself is a despicable person, finds her deceased, and in a strange twist to an already really messed up story, he takes her body and he cuts it up into 12 pieces and sends each piece to a tribe of Israel as a way of kind of spreading the word of what has happened. And when the whole nation hears about this, they are so disturbed and they are so outraged by what has happened that all the men gather against the city of Gibeah, and they unite as one man, set to destroy it. And so the country erupts into civil war. The other 11 tribes determine that the men of Gibeah need to be eliminated, but the whole tribe of Benjamin rallies in defense of Gibeah and determines to fight off the other tribes. And though Benjamin battles bravely and actually has some military success, they're just vastly outnumbered. And eventually they are overwhelmed, and the city of Gibeah is burned to the ground. In total, we're told that 25,000 Benjamite warriors were killed, and only 600 men remain alive. And the rest of Israel is so grieved by this, and so they decided to stop their eradication effort and determined to let the Benjamin people repopulate. However, the only problem is that all the other men had sworn an oath to not let any of their daughters marry a man from Benjamin, and so they have no women to offer the Benjamites in order to repopulate. And so the people asked themselves, was there any tribe or any city of people that did not join us in our effort to eradicate the Benjamites? And after doing a little research, they discovered that no men from a place called Jabesh Gilead came to help. And so the violence in this story continues. The men of Israel go to Jabesh Gilead, and they kill everyone there because they failed to help, and they spare only 400 maidens who they capture and bring back to be wives for the men of Benjamin. Again, it is a horrible story, a terrible story, and it's supposed to be. It's meant to be disturbing. You're supposed to read it and go, okay, this is really awful, because it sets the stage for what is to come. As the book of Judges concludes, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so the implication that's kind of being hinted at here is that when there is no government, people devolve into lawlessness. And so the thought is that maybe a king can kind of help curtail the depravity of the people. You know, it makes me think of the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes, who argued that people should embrace or rather trade some of their freedom in exchange for security that a king would give you, because having an absolute monarch allows you to escape a chaotic state of nature where the life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Essentially, people need a monarchy to save them from themselves, is the argument. Which is exactly why Israel wants a king. And so all of this finally brings us back to Saul, the appointed king. And back to the question from the very beginning. Can Saul, this king of Israel, save the people from themselves? Can he keep Israel on the right track? Can this man save us? Well, let's find out by finally jumping in to our passage. Again, we are in 1 Samuel 11, and I'm going to start by reading verse 1. Then Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to Nahash, "Make a treaty with us, and we will serve you." But Nahash the Ammonite said to them, "On this condition I will make a treaty with you, that I gouge out all your right eyes, and thus bring disgrace on all Israel." The elders of Jabesh said to him, "Give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers through all the territory of Israel. Then if there is no one to save us, we will give ourselves up to you." So our chapter begins with what should now be a familiar place. Jabesh Gilead has, since all this happened 150 years ago, been repopulated. But now the people of the city find themselves facing eradication once again. They are being besieged by the Ammonites. Now, last week we talked about the Philistines, Israel's primary enemy, but God's people had other foes as well. The neighboring nation of Ammon was one of those additional adversaries. But again, remember, the main job of this new king is to save my people from the hand of the Philistines. So kind of consider this disturbance from the Ammonites as like a side quest, right? Not the primary storyline. Nonetheless, the Ammonites invade Jabesh Gilead, an easy target given its location on the border of these nations. And just like their predecessors, the people of Jabesh Gilead aren't much for fighting. And so they offer to simply give themselves up to Nahash, the king of the Ammonites. Well, that's no fun, the vile Nahash says to himself. And so he says, he's like, simple surrender, that would be way too easy. And so he demands that every man from Jabesh gouge out their right eye. And not only is this sadistic, but really it would render the men of Jabesh useless in battle. But really the Ammonites, their ambition goes far beyond Jabesh Gilead. King Nahash wants to bring disgrace on all Israel. He knows that as it stands, Israel is simply a loose federation of independent tribes, which in his mind spells weakness for them. And so when the people of Jabesh ask for 7 days to go find help, I imagine Nahash kind of steeples his fingers like a villain and laughs at this, because this is what he wants. This is all a part of the plan. He wants the people of Israel to muster what he expects to be this half-hearted, ragtag group of soldiers so that he can crush them right then and there. So that he can bring disgrace to all of Israel in one sitting. Needless to say, the men of Jabesh send messengers and plead for help. And if there is no one to save us, they promise Nahash, then we will give ourselves up to you. So let's see what happens. Check out verse 4. He says, when the messengers came to where? Gibeah, right? That name ring a bell, right? Why do they go to Gibeah? Probably because they have a shared history, right? They might even have like second cousins there. There's some sort of history between their two cities, two towns. So when the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, they reported the matter in the ears of the people, and all the people wept aloud. Now behold, Saul was coming from the field behind the oxen. And Saul said, "What is wrong with the people that they are weeping?" And so they told him the news of the men of Jabesh. So this is like a small detail that maybe you wouldn't think about right away. When Saul becomes king, he doesn't get whisked away to a castle somewhere, right? He doesn't have a White House or Buckingham Palace to go stay in. Because Saul's the first king, right? He doesn't have anywhere to go. There is no such place for the king to live. All the more, he doesn't really have a job yet. And so he goes back to working with his dad on the farm. The king of Israel is just an ordinary dude out there plowing his field with his oxen. Up to this point, not much has really changed in Saul's life. And you can tell that the people don't really think much of him based on their reaction. When they hear that Jabesh is under siege and they about to have their eyes all gouged out, they all weep, right? They weep because the situation seems hopeless. Man, rally an army to save the people of Jabesh in 7 days, right? It's a rescue mission that sounds like Mission Impossible. And yeah, they have a king, but he isn't much of one, right? He's just a dude who's farming. He hasn't really done anything for us. We can't rely on him. Up to this point, Saul has no answer to those skeptics who asked that question, how can this man save us? He has not answered their rebuke. But all that is about to change. Look at verse 6. And the Spirit of God rushed upon Saul when he heard these words, and his anger was greatly kindled. He took a yoke of oxen and cut them in pieces and sent them throughout all the territory of Israel by the hand of the messengers, saying, whoever does not come out after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. So in the previous chapters, Saul's every move was characterized by hiding and hesitation. But you see none of that here, right? Upon hearing the news of the Ammonites and how they've laid siege to Jabesh Gilead, Saul erupts in anger and immediately jumps into action. Now, what has changed? Well, you could say that the Spirit of God is rushed upon him and has inspired him to do this. Like judges such as Gideon or Samson, Saul is moved by this righteous rage that propels him to take action, to do something, to take up arms. He sees the people of God being mistreated, and so he determines that he's got to do something about it. He will not allow Israel, his kingdom, to be disgraced. But the actions he takes should raise eyebrows. Saul takes his oxen that he was just working with, and he cuts them into pieces. And he sends the body parts throughout the nation of Israel. Now, what does that sound like? It sounds like the Levite with his concubine. It brings your mind back to this horrific story. Obviously dismembering an oxen is a lot less appalling than what the Levite did or what happened to the concubine. But it is at the very least unsettling that Saul, the appointed king, is behaving in a way that kind of points your mind back to this dark time in Israel's history when there was no king. And Saul's grisly message comes with a threat. He says, whoever does not come after Saul and Samuel, so shall it be done to his oxen. Saul uses a threat, right, to get the people moving. He uses fear as kind of like this manipulation tactic. Because again, the people aren't used to having a king. They don't have this strong national identity. They might not have much of a reason to really listen to Saul. And this is even more apparent by the fact that Saul doesn't muster the troops by his own authority. He's got to include Samuel in this as well. Because Samuel has something that Saul does not, which is respect and rapport. And despite the unsettling undertones of this message, Saul's strategy works because as the end of verse 7 says, the dread of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out as one man. Now, church, when was the last time that the people of Israel were all united as one man? Anybody remember? 150 years ago. That's right. 150 years ago, when all the people of Israel gathered as one man against the tribe of Benjamin. And so how ironic is that now 150 years later, they are united as one man under the leadership of not only a king who is from the tribe of Benjamin, but who is a Gibeonite, right? A man from the same town as this horrific incident took place. God's definitely got a sense of humor, if you can even call it that. It's just so ironic. But again, we're brought back to that central question. Can this man, Saul of Gibeah, of all places, save us? How can this man save us? Saul has mustered the troops, but can he do anything with them? Well, let's keep reading and find out. Verse 8. When he mustered them at Bezek, the people of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said to the messengers who had come, "Thus shall you say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow by the time the sun is hot, you shall have salvation." When the messengers came and told the men of Jabesh, they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, "Tomorrow we will give ourselves up to you, and you may do to us whatever seems good to you." And the next day Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the camp in the morning watch and struck down the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And those who survived were scattered, so that no 2 of them were left together. Victory, right? The people of Jabesh Gilead are saved. And man, this is Saul's breakthrough moment, isn't it? Like, in order for there to be a fall of Saul, there's got to be a rise of Saul, right? And this is most certainly it. Because Saul, in this moment, he demonstrates a number of things. First, he shows leadership, right? He's able to muster the people and lead them into battle. He also shows intelligence. He presumably has the people of Jabesh pretend to kind of give themselves up, to surrender as a way to put the Ammonites at ease. Like, he doesn't want the enemy anticipating a battle. Which leads into another attribute that he demonstrates, which is an understanding of military strategy. He puts his army into 3 divisions, allowing them to surround and attack the enemy from multiple sides. And he plans his ambush during the last watch of the night, aka at daybreak. And so most of the Ammonite army is going to be rubbing sleep from their eyes and looking directly into the rising sun right before they're sliced to pieces. The battle lasts only a few hours, and so by the heat of the day, the Ammonites are handily defeated. Saul answers his doubters by leading the Israelites to a decisive victory. Now listen to how the people respond. Verse 12. Then the people said to Samuel, "Who is it that said, 'Shall Saul reign over us?' Bring the men, that we may put them to death." But Saul said, "Not a man shall be put to death this day. For today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Then Samuel said to the people, "Come, let us go to Gilgal, and there renew the kingdom." And so all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel greatly rejoiced. So we see this process of coronation happening. In chapter 10, Saul was designated to be king. In chapter 11, Saul demonstrates his ability to lead the people as king. And now finally, at the end of this passage, the people publicly confirm Saul as their king. They renew the kingdom, as the prophet Samuel puts it. You know, you probably have heard of people like married couples, for example, renewing their vows as a way of reaffirming their commitment to each other. Or maybe you grew up in a church where the tradition was for the congregation to kind of do an annual vote of confidence, right? For the pastor to determine whether or not you should keep the pastor or kind of let him keep moving on. Like, and if we did that, I have to tell you, I'd be a pretty nervous wreck, because today would be the day to do the vote, right? Today would be the 6th year of me being here as pastor, and so today would be the day that everyone would vote. Are we going to keep Pastor Tommy, or are we going to let him go? But, so happy anniversary. We don't do that tradition, so you're still stuck with me. I'll let you know that. But anyway, Saul receives a vote of confidence from the people, except for the fact that he's only been king for a month, right? He hasn't been there very long. But hey, at least the people are now on board. But what about those who publicly doubted? Well, even though some zealous Israelites want to have them put to death, Saul shows mercy and does not do such a thing. And our story ends with like a massive party, right? A celebration of the victory and of Saul, who is now wholeheartedly accepted as the king of Israel. And there in Gilgal, Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. However, there is a name that is noticeably absent from this celebration. I imagine that as the crowd of Israelites sing and dance around the campfire, laughing and praising God for delivering them from the Ammonites, there is a figure standing on the side in the shadows. He is not laughing. He is not rejoicing. As Samuel's ancient body leans against his staff, the prophet, I imagine, surveys this massive party with a frown on his face and a pit in his stomach. Because as Samuel himself will say, when the people saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against them, they said to me, "No, but a king shall reign over us," when the Lord your God was their king. They did not trust in God, but instead the people looked elsewhere for salvation, demanding a king who could save them. And so as Samuel says, your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord in asking for yourselves a king. Though this chapter is most certainly the high point in Saul's extended story, it is a sobering reminder that all of us are all too prone to look to anyone but God to save us. Like Saul's skeptics, you likely have looked at leaders in your life or people in your life and have wondered, can this person save me? Can this person deliver me from whatever is going on in my life right now? I know I'm guilty of this. Perhaps you are too. To the point that maybe you shape your identity around different people. Like maybe every election cycle, you find yourself wrapping your identity around the politics of it all. You find yourself clinging and putting your hope in a certain candidate. Your heart grows anxious because, man, if your candidate wins, you're saved, right? The economy is going to be better. The prices will be lower. There will be peace in the country. There will be hope for a better future. But if that other person gets in the office, well, man, it's the end of the world as we know it, right? I might as well file for bankruptcy right now, right? I might as well just declare that my life is over. Or maybe for you, it's a relationship in your life. Like maybe your marriage. Like maybe you look to your husband to be that person who makes you happy. Like unless he fulfills your needs or keeps the romantic spark alive or does those chores that you need him to do, you're not going to be satisfied. You need him to step up and provide. And your whole persona is kind of wrapped around that. Or for guys, maybe it's your wife. Like your worth as a man is wrapped up in whether or not you can give her everything she wants. And when you can't live up to those expectations, when you fail to provide, when you fail to live up to those standards, it's devastating. Man, whether you realize it or not, you're looking at your spouse to save you, to give your life meaning and purpose. But the lesson that Saul's example teaches us is that the answer to the question, how can this man save us, is simply, he can't. He can't save you. The king can't save you. The president can't save you. Your spouse can't save you. No one can save you. Every time you place your hope in the ability of a leader or a loved one, you take yourself deeper down a dead-end road. Because no one can save you from that which is most dangerous, and that is sin. Saul is the hero in chapter 11, yes, but very soon his sin is going to make a huge mess of things, as will the sin of every king to come after him. You know, Thomas Hobbes thought that people needed a king to save them from themselves, but the reality is that a king can't save the people from himself. Yet despite all of this, King Saul is the one who actually points us to the only person who can save you. Verse 13, he says, "Today the Lord has worked salvation in Israel." Friends, God is our only hope. Jesus is the only one who can truly save you from what is most dangerous, save you from sin. The saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. Christ is where the firm foundation on which your identity can rest. Christ is the anchor that holds you in place even when the world seems to be falling apart. Christ is the only one who gives true victory. He is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. He is the one who works out salvation. And so, in the words of another king, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And I just want to end by asking, is there something in your life or someone in your life where you're putting your hope and trust? Is there a king, so to speak, that you're looking to, that you're wrapping your identity in to bring you hope? Friends, all other sources of hope will ultimately fail. Jesus is the only one who can truly save. And so I pray that you will turn to him and look to him as your hope in salvation. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your word. We thank you for ways in which stories like this that happened thousands of years ago still are able to point us to truths that we need to remember today, even in our world, even as we look at our world and see the chaos and the dysfunction. That God, you are our only hope in troubling times. So God, we cling to that. We cling to you. Help us, Lord, to not look at our governing officials or even friends or even spouses as our source of hope and identity and purpose and meaning. But God, maybe look to you as our hope, our firm foundation, the only one who can truly save us. God, we thank you for making that salvation available to us through Jesus dying on the cross in our place. God, may we receive that salvation and live in light of that salvation. God, you are so good, and you are our King. And so we worship you as the King of kings and Lord of lords. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen.